I'm Eric Chemi, and this is Politely Pushy. Welcome to Politely Pushy. I'm your host, as always, Eric Chemi. Today, I am joined by Michael Nuñez. He's the editorial director at VentureBeat. He's also on the board of directors of the San Francisco Press Club and has been at the leading edge of how we can use AI in journalism. So thank you, Michael, or Mike, or Nuñez, one of your monikers here. Thanks for coming on the show with me today.
Thanks for having me.
First off, just before we dig in, just briefly explain to the audience what VentureBeat's focus is, because I know it's not just venture capital. Like, it's a little bit more than that, but how far beyond that do you guys report?
Yeah, it's a great question. So VentureBeat really tries to focus on two things primarily: artificial intelligence news and enterprise data news. And we're constantly looking at the intersection of these two spaces. So basically, as businesses have digitized and data has proliferated, we're looking at how companies are organizing that information, how they're labeling it, and then how they're using it for machine learning to execute different business processes. And then, in a similar vein, kind of birthed from that movement was the artificial intelligence movement. So we're looking at, again, some of the latest AI products, how businesses are integrating those. And I guess our goal really is to follow this news for enterprise technical decision makers. So CIOs, CTOs, people that are making purchasing decisions on all of this new software and all of these new tools. Our goal is really to help kind of guide these people through those decisions, but also, hopefully provide a little bit of context and analysis for what has proven to be a really rapidly evolving industry. So I've been focused on this beat for about a year and a half, and I have to say, having covered tech news for over a decade, this artificial intelligence wave is just moving at a pace that I've never seen before. It's really incredible.
This is the moment, right? You feel like people have become famous because they were war correspondents during a very important war, or certain shows. I remember Nightline on ABC with Ted Koppel started as a result of the Iran hostage crisis, and then it became a fixture. Or you hear about the stories of the famous news people when certain events happened, right, and it made their moment. It feels like AI is that moment, and you may be that person in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, I joined VentureBeat coming from a venture capital job. So I was actually working in marketing in Palo Alto at a deep tech VC firm. And in November of 2022, I tried something called ChatGPT. And, I wouldn't say that it was life changing, but there was definitely an aha moment. It reminded me a lot of using Google for the first time. And it just felt really obvious to me that this tool or something like it would be part of my job for the next several decades. So as a storyteller, as someone who who had done a lot of traditional reporting and was still sort of helping founders and builders and scientists like tell their story and distill really complicated information for large audiences. It just seemed obvious that large language models and generative AI were going to play an integral role in that process in the future. And so I tried ChatGPT. I'm really sort of awestruck by its capabilities, and from that point on, decided that I just needed to find the fastest way, or like the easiest way, to get involved in the space. And VentureBeat proved to be that opportunity. It was a company that had been established in San Francisco for several decades, and was known in the venture capital space really well. And then, for me, it was a lot of the engineers, the builders, the doers, the people that are on the ground in San Francisco knew VentureBeat really well. They had a positive relationship with it because it is able to get so technical. And so, I actually had chased down this other VC offer at another deep tech VC firm, and ended up taking the job at VentureBeat because I thought it was more squarely focused on the stuff that was going to impact my life for the next several decades, and that was just this AI wave and sort of the data that it's built upon. And yeah, I'll say that the past year and a half has just been incredible. I mean, when I graduated college in 2009, I was following the mobile app era, and I remember downloading different apps every week. You were trying to find like the next cool apps. Like, oh, did you try Instagram? Like, this app lets you take photos and they look retro, and that's really cool. And so it was really exciting to trying to discover what the next big app was going to be, and what people would be talking about on campus. And I remember graduating, in 2009, kind of post recession, and the pace at which news was coming out of San Francisco during the mobile boom was incredible. There was like maybe 2 to 3 new apps that you had to try every week, and these were big announcements, and there was a ton of news around them. And this was also like during the golden era of blogging, so you had Gawker covering it, and Huffington Post, and BuzzFeed, and VentureBeat, and TechCrunch, and there were all of these different blogs that were kind of you know following that technological wave. And so when I think about those early days of my journalism career versus now, I would say there's probably like a 10x output rate, meaning that every day, like literally right now, there's 2 to 3 big stories that I'm not able to get to because I'm on a call. And this happens every single day where there are several major announcements. We just don't have enough people and enough time to even cover, all of the different stuff that's happening across the ecosystem. And so as a journalist, it's really exciting because you get to pick and choose, what the best stories are going to be and sort of where the highest impact is going to be. And, it can be challenging at times, but in my opinion, it's a really awesome problem to have because there's no shortage of stories. You can kind of tell, there's so many different variations of ways to get involved or ways to tell these different stories. And so just following like the LLM race, for example, the competition between OpenAI and Anthropic and Google and Meta, I could spend all week just on those companies and just on that narrative, and it would be perfectly fine. And frankly, we'd find a lot of readers that way. I do spend a lot of time covering those companies, and I would add NVIDIA in there as well. But we're also trying to make time for some of the startups, and really trying to trying to stay connected to sort of the founding of VentureBeat, which was once upon a time it was like the definitive San Francisco startup brand. They were covering venture capital and the startups that were being built out of the mobile boom. And there was an event series called Mobile Beat, and it was really I think a prosperous time for the company. So I think in many ways we're kind of getting back to our roots, and again, we're sort of this platform for the builders, the doers, the technical folks in San Francisco, the people that are building this technology, which is really exciting. But yeah, then just I think at a more minute level, sort of on the ground as a reporter, I feel like a dog chasing cars a little bit. There's so much happening, and so every day is kind of a challenge to set your priorities and hopefully find those stories that have the highest impact.
How do you decide what to focus on and what not to? Like you said, hey, we could just do this one thing, this one area, and we would get readers, but we also need to cover some of the newer names, the smaller companies, the future behemoths, right? We can't just do the current giants right now. How do you make that decision? Because we know you still got to get eyeballs, you still got to get clicks, you got to keep advertisers happy, you got to get readers. And sometimes there's that tension between what the readers think they want and what you think the reader should want.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think I have to admit it's an ongoing conversation. It's something that I'm constantly talking to my coworkers about. So, Carl Franzen is our executive editor, and Matt Marshall is our editor in chief. And so there is constant, healthy debate, I think, in our newsroom about what we should be covering and whatnot. I think for me, just on kind of a personal level, and usually the angle that I take, that I bring to those conversations is talking about impact. I think that, I was, formerly the technology editor of Popular Science magazine. And that was another tough job where, you're looking at the entire world of science every single day and trying to decide, what the most important news in science and technology is. And that was tough. And then you're making decisions about what to feature on printed pages, once upon a time. And so that job was really tough, but we ended up, we often came back to impact. Like, how many people does this impact? Is this a world's first? Why should our readers care? Essentially, I think those were the types of questions that we were asking off the bat. And so when we're having this like internal dialogue at VentureBeat, that's the question that I'm asking. It doesn't matter necessarily how much a startup raises or how interested I am in the technology. If I just think it's cool, those things matter less to me than what the impact is. How many customers is this going to impact? How many people in the United States will this impact? Is this going to change the way that you handle emails or the way that you manage projects? Or, is this going to make doing your taxes easier? I think and obviously, that lens kind of looking through that lens, but applied to enterprises. I think when we zero in on impact, typically that's when we find the best stories, and we've had a lot of breakout stories that were unexpected. Basically, just because we decided to focus on impact. One right now, I think, is the top story on our site, which is about Airtable AI. So they have a no-code platform that allows you to just build apps by describing them through text. And so, my headline was like, "Forget coding boot camps. Airtable's AI can build your app in seconds." And those are the types of stories that frankly, like, I wasn't, I didn't do it because I thought it was going to be the most read. I did it because I thought it was a really interesting application of AI, and it would have a high impact on a broad number of people, or a lot of people. And yeah, so that's like, just an example of a breakout story that maybe we didn't quite expect.
There's so much that we can go. I have like 10 tentacles of questions based on what you were saying there. So we'll try our best to get some of them. Impact. We talked to a lot of companies, a lot of startups, like, hey, we need to get this kind of press, but their impact is small. They may make a lot of money, but their cultural impact is small. The number of human beings that it affects is kind of small, if that makes sense, right? Let's say they're B2B or they are very niche in a particular industry. So you wonder about, how do they get those stories, right? How do they get that coverage? Because here you are doing, hey, you build your app in seconds. Maybe that's not necessarily the highest technology, the biggest, most difficult, most deep technology, but that's the story that you're running. So I'm curious, as you think about stories, what are the kinds of stories that you just think, I get this pitch too many times, I don't want to hear about it, but I wish I got this other kind of pitch instead?
Yeah, I mean, there is something called AI washing right now that is that I'm sure you can even imagine what that might be, or what it might look like in your inbox. But essentially, the question that I constantly have to ask myself is, are the incumbents using artificial intelligence in a really interesting way that's going to impact their customers? So I'm thinking of a company like Adobe, which has millions of users. It's been established as sort of the de facto design tool, digital, the graphic design tool, the de facto graphic design tool, and something that creative professionals use. And so Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, those are the gold standard. But that is set against currently it's the gold standard, but it's set against the backdrop of things like Canva, which were built on mobile apps and on iPads that allow people to drag and drop and require less technical training. And then there's now artificial intelligence, which a lot of these services offer text to image or text to video, so you can just simply describe the image that you want, and it will generate almost exactly that. When it's working correctly. And so the question that I have to ask myself is, like daily, is a company like Adobe, when it releases a new product, slapping AI onto something that already exists in an uncreative way, in a way that's not going to really have high impact or really affect the way that people use their tool? Is it going to look like sort of a mutant appendage, attached to this old monster body that is Adobe, the Adobe Creative Suite, or are they, actually integrating this transformative technology in a really interesting way? in the case of Adobe, I think they've actually done a pretty great job of integrating generative AI into their image generation tools, and frankly into some of their design tools. And so now they're letting people generate images and backgrounds and different elements within the app that already existed. So there's high customizability in Photoshop and in Design and Illustrator, but then they're also adding generative components to that. And a year ago, that wasn't so obvious. A year ago, the conversation was, oh my gosh, what is a company like Adobe going to do? There's all of these generative AI startups, and frankly, mobile first startups that are threatening to eat that company's lunch. And I think in the case of Adobe, they've done a really good job of adapting to the marketplace. But that's just one example. There's like 20, maybe there's like 50 companies that are doing this. Or I guess at this point, maybe every Fortune 500 company is looking at generative AI and thinking about how they might integrate it. So when Coca-Cola uses generative AI, again, just to use kind of a random example, the examples that I've seen have been less high impact. AI is not changing the way that the Coca-Cola formula tastes, or sort of what the experience of drinking a Coca-Cola is like. And so therefore, when I see a pitch that says, Coca-Cola is using AI to do X, the few that I've seen have not really reached that threshold or crossed that bar for us. Whereas like some of these technology companies that are being threatened right now by AI, they're scrambling to figure out how to use this stuff. And I guess my job is to figure out whether that is a good use of generative AI or kind of a lazy use of generative AI. And again, my inbox is it's the most full that it's ever been, which is kind of scary to say, because like there have been, my inbox is always a little bit messy just because of the number of pitches that I'm getting. But I think with this AI wave, it's been even heightened. I think that I'm receiving even more pitches. So like by the time I'm done with this call, I'll have a full new page of emails in my inbox. I'll have to click to page 2 and start pick up where I left off. Just for
how much time do you even spend on these emails? Do you just immediately delete, or do you even open it? Do you just see the subject line? Do you go and give them a one line of the body? What do you do?
Yeah, good question. I think that the people that I work with, like, I always try to respond to the people that I work closely with, the people that I know, just give them a hard yes or no, or at least say, I need this question answered before I consider it. So I've always tried to do my best. At one point I was doing inbox 0. I think that's just impossible now. But I'm still kind of looking for the people that I know and the companies that I know and the names I'm familiar with. And then for some of those wild card ones, a little bit of it is chance. And I think, I do try my best to go line by line through every email every day. It's just by the time I get to the email, sometimes it's 2:00 and the story went live at 10 a.m. or something. And so that's when it gets to be a little bit tricky, when there's a lot of news early in the morning and I can only get to 1 or 2 things, or maybe assign a couple. And there are others that are left in the inbox. And so yeah, man, that has been probably the biggest challenge of this job, has been managing the number of messages that I'm sending from text and email and LinkedIn and Twitter. There's so much coming at me at this point. And frankly, a lot of these stories are valid. I mean, they're really interesting. I think there are a lot of creative uses of artificial intelligence right now, particularly in the startup space, that deserve more attention. But I think also like the levers and the sort of infrastructure of digital media is changing right now. So the way that we get readers, and the way that people discover stories, and just what people are looking for, is all changing really rapidly. So
Like how? Give some examples on those changes.
Yeah. So like an easy example that I would use is just the release of the iPhone, right? I mentioned again, I graduated in 2009. I think the iPhone was the first iPhone came out in 2007. Okay,
Yeah.
so just before that. So when I graduated, the iPhone was like, I mean, definitely one of the coolest products of all time, and people were tracking its development really closely. They were, and so the keywords iPhone release date were by far and away the most popular search term that I have ever seen on Google Trends. And I would challenge any listener that has made it this far into the conversation to check that out. Go to google.com/trends and search iPhone release date and look at the historical data and just how popular that used to be. It's still a really popular term. People still use the iPhone. They're still curious about the new releases, but there's less fervor, I guess, over each of these announcements. So I think at one point, when millennials were younger and when phones were new and we were all chasing like the newest, most exciting phone, and there were, actually like really big leaps in the technology with each new release. I think that that people were genuinely excited about that stuff. I think now, 10 years after the fact, I think that the younger generation is just a little less excited about phones. They grew up with phones. They've had them since they were in middle school or elementary school in some cases, and so they're super familiar with the form factor, the iPad and the iPhone. They've seen them. They grew up with them. They're all kind of the same. I think the technology itself has gotten really iterative, so we're no longer seeing like huge leaps in capabilities, on the camera side and on the processing side, and so all that is to say that iPhone release date is no longer like the hottest keyword. I think right now the hottest keyword is probably ChatGPT. Everyone seems to like, if you don't already know about it, you're trying to learn about it. And then even the people that are using it and have some familiarity with it are just trying to track the daily and sort of weekly updates to both ChatGPT, the service, but also just like some of the competition and what's going on in the industry. So I think like, consumer electronics were, 10 years ago, I think were some of the most popular stories on the web. And that's why you saw so many different publishers building their sites around these recommendation engines, so they, doing best like the, best gifts of 2020 or the best gifts of 2015 or something. Best headphones of 2015. You would see that story on like every site you can imagine, CNN and New York Magazine and Popular Science, and all of them were playing this referrals game. They were trying to, review these products, but then also link out to the ones that they liked through Amazon so that they could get some referral money, for guiding people through their purchasing decisions. I think now that SEO play is just not as important for publishers right now. I think publishers are really having to ask, like everyone's having a little bit of an identity crisis, because I think every newsroom this year or last has had to ask, like, what really differentiates us? What value are we really bringing to the reader? And sort of what justifies, like, how do we justify our existence? And I think for some, it's going to be high value, high impact reporting. They're going to have paywalls and subscriptions. They'll have really, really strong newsletters, and every newsroom's going to have a different combination of these products. But yeah, I think like some of the cheap and easy wins, I'll say, like these SEO plays for consumer product news, I think that is just over with. I think like in the near future, if not already, people will be using chat systems like ChatGPT or Claude 3.5 Sonnet or Meta's Llama. They'll just ask one of these chats like, "Hey, what are the best headphones right now? What are the best Bluetooth wireless headphones that I can buy?" And the chatbot will list the options and explain why you might choose one or the other. And so you'll end up having a conversation with a chat interface rather than Googling what are the best headphones and then going through a list of blue links to find the product that you're looking for.
How are you guys going to make money then going forward? How does VentureBeat or anything like it all, the industry, how will you make money?
Yeah, that is confidential. No, I'm just joking. That I think that
only you guys know. VentureBeat will be the only digital media platform that knows how to make money. That's it.
That's right. It's proprietary. That is a trade secret. No, I think we're like a lot of other newsrooms. It's going to be a combination of events, of subscriptions. I think there are editorial products that we've talked about launching that could have an impact on that side. there's still display ads on VentureBeat. I don't know, how other newsrooms are making those decisions, but look, I think in media in 2024, you never want to put all of your eggs in one basket. So if I was running an independent newsletter, I had a subscription base, that's fine, but you'd still want to consider things like, should I be hosting an event with panels? Like, I look at what Eric Newcomer is doing, using his Substack, newcomer.co. He's right now one of my favorite journalists because he is pioneering really this new form factor where he has a really successful newsletter focused on venture capital. And then he's also spun out an event series from that popular newsletter called Cerebral Valley, where he gathers some of the biggest investors and thought leaders in AI. And so, I really kind of commend what he's been able to do just as a one-man band. And I think, truthfully, like large newsrooms are playing the exact same game. We're trying to build our newsletter subscription rates and make sure that people are consistently finding our newsletter and finding it valuable and sharing it. We're using social media to promote some of our biggest and best stories and advertise upcoming events. And then we're also, kind of building out this event infrastructure so that we can have, small events with 50 people, and we can also have big events with a few hundred or a few thousand. So I think VentureBeat is pretty distributed across a lot of different vectors, and then the display ads piece of that as well, and then also some paid content. So there's all of these different tools I think that publishers sort of have in their toolbox. Different publishers are going to prioritize different things, I think, just based on the needs of the site, based on their reader behavior. And so those are decisions that are definitely a little bit above my pay grade, but I support Matt Marshall, our founder and editor-in-chief, and all of the decisions that he's made. Frankly, one of the reasons I decided to join VentureBeat was I thought that Matt navigated the last several cycles really well. So when I look at the digital media landscape, the one that I grew up with, the Huffington Post, BuzzFeed, Vice, Gawker, those were my favorite sites for a really long time. Most of them don't exist anymore, or don't exist in the way that they once did. And so, meanwhile, Matt has maintained credibility and stability at VentureBeat, and so I definitely let him kind of lead on the business side of things, and I'm just trying to learn. And really, I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that you have to have a very distributed strategy so that when market shifts arise, you can, kind of rework things or reimagine things really quickly, and you're not too dependent on any single piece of revenue.
What do you think about, and you've talked about this before publicly, the use of AI in writing the stories, in doing the content, in replacing, or let's say augmenting the journalist's work?
Yeah, I mean, this is something I'm super proud of at VentureBeat. I think that I really take a lot of pride in sort of being early adopters of this stuff and evangelists. We never in 2023, early 2023, I was on this panel with it was this panel on AI and media at the Microsoft Silicon Valley offices, and there were all these tier one journalists and news sites that were kind of represented on this panel. So Wired and Reuters and Bloomberg and CNET and several others. And then there was me from VentureBeat, and I had just started the job. And I remember being really excited to join that panel because, I wanted to just dive into like how people were thinking about this technology, the frameworks that they were using, how they plan to use it in the newsroom. Maybe we were going to talk about different prompts and prompt engineering. And so I was like ready to go pretty deep on this stuff. And I remember getting to the event, and in the green room, I just heard all of these murmurs of negativity. It was just like people talking about hallucinations and all of the risks that were involved in AI, which are completely valid. But it was clear to me that I had a lot of skeptics and pessimists on the panel with me. So I sort of, in that moment decided like, you know what, I'm going to be the token evangelist on stage, I guess, because I really believe in this stuff, and I'm just going to lean in. And so, from that moment on, really, I tried to kind of champion the technology on stage, and I think I didn't realize how sensitive that was at the time, and like how divisive or polarizing that could be, and still is a year later. That still comes up. People will ask me, like, "Oh, are you the guy that was on stage that everyone was like yelling at?" But my approach has always been the same, and this is what I said, a year ago, and it's still true today. I want our journalists interacting with this technology. Like, I think it's wrong to shy away from it, to withhold this technology from people, to prevent people from engaging with it. I think as reporters, and then especially as AI reporters, we need to be stress testing these tools. We need to know what their weaknesses are. We need to know what their strengths are. We need to be able to talk about the differences between Claude 3.5 Sonnet and GPT 4.0 and Llama 3.1 and all of these different models. We need to be able to kind of get into the weeds on this stuff, especially at VentureBeat, where we're a little bit more technical than like a mass market tech blog. And so my approach has always been, we should be running toward this technology. You should be experimenting with it in your off hours, and you should be finding ways to integrate it into your workflow. I think along with that, I never wanted to tell people exactly how to use the technology. I still think that would be the wrong approach. So I don't want to say, here's a prompt that you should run every single story that you write through. And we're just going to run this copy editing prompt through all of our stories through this copy editing prompt, and that's our new copy editor. We're just going to automate copy editing. That was never the idea for me. I think it was more of a research tool and more of a process tool, but not, the idea was never, and I think a lot of the AI and media conversations get stuck in this space where we're talking about just automating different news processes. I think people get this idea that you're just going to feed like 50 press releases into an AI model, get a bunch of crappy SEO stories, publish that stuff, and call it a day. And I think that and then it's laden with errors and factual errors and hallucinations, and a lot of publishers have gotten in trouble for that. Sports Illustrated, CNET, and a few other high-profile cases have shown that is just like the wrong way. Readers don't want that, and it's not a sustainable business model. It actually hurts the business because it hurts credibility. I think my approach was really just like everyone work. My belief here is everyone works differently, so everyone's going to have a different process. The way that I use Google is going to be different than the way that you use Google versus Carl Franzen, my co-editor, versus Matt Marshall, my boss. We're all using these tools differently, and so it would be wrong to prescribe to people, a specific way to use these models. But that being said, I think that it's like a moral imperative. It's like they should, as an editor at VentureBeat, like, I think I've said this to Matt, like the people that aren't using these tools should not be at this company. I just think that, if you're going to be focused on AI, if you're going to be an AI reporter or an AI editor, and you're not using ChatGPT, or you can't talk, you can't get into the weeds on, some of its strengths and some of its weaknesses and how it compares to these different competitors. I just think that you're not doing your job. I think that it is part of the job to engage with the stuff. And so I personally love these tools. I use them all the time. I'm trying to find new ways to integrate them into my workflow every single day, really. And I think that there are, most of our staff is engaging with this stuff on a regular basis. And I say that all with the preface of, or I should have kind of prefaced this with, the rules of journalism still apply. You still have to fact check. You still have to get people's names right. You still have to get, spell people's names right. You still have to get the names of companies right. You still have to get all of the little details right, and go, word by word and line by line, and edit your story before you publish. So I think those, the same process that I had at Popular Science when I was closing magazines at 1 a.m. in the morning, and in New York City, I'm still using that exact same process today. I'll write my story. Sometimes I'll engage with LLMs for research or for phrasing something in a really specific way if I need like a zinger at the end of a story or something. But after I finish the first draft of the story, I'm going through it and line editing in the same way that I would at Popular Science. It's word by word. You put a red dot over every single word, and you're checking the spelling, the grammar, and the facts of each and every word, and then after that process is over, then I'll publish. And so that's all to say, we still hold our standards at the same level, but this is just a new tool, like Grammarly, like any other writing tool. Even Microsoft Office, I would argue, is just a software tool that people are using to get their job done a little bit faster. Otter AI would be another one. Again, like I'll never tell a journalist like what tools they should be using or what their process should be like. I know people that are still taking handwritten notes, and it's 2024, which seems wild to me, but those journalists have a process that they've had for a really long time, and I think it's only fair to sort of honor that as an editor, and just encourage them to maybe think about whether there's a faster way to do that, or just a more accurate or better way to do that. I'm not sure if that specifically answers your question.
That's good. When you mention Office, I think about spell check, right? Back in the day, like, no, you got to know how to spell it yourself. You can't rely on spell check, otherwise you're not going to know. And now it's like we forgot about it. So you move this forward 20 years, we'll see. I'm curious, before we go, your experience having come from back and forth, but you were in the tech sector itself. You were not necessarily in journalism for that period where you were in technology. How has that shaped your perspective from someone who has only been a journalist, right? You've been a practitioner, you've been on the other side. You probably see that disconnect of here's what they're talking about in those offices, but here's what the media cares about. And often it's like two totally different bubbles.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, that's such a good question. We could probably do an entire podcast solely on the differences between these two worlds. I mean, I think for me, like, I really pride myself in being able to angle stories in a variety of ways. So, I was once the tech editor of Gizmodo at Gawker Media, where it was very adversarial. We were kind of sharpening our knives and going after the big companies. I was doing investigative reporting on Facebook at the time, and some of that stuff has been entered into the congressional record, during Zuckerberg's visit to Washington a few years ago, and it's also been entered a few other times since then into the record. And so that was high impact investigative adversarial reporting at Gawker Media, which is about as I think like as kind of adversarial as you can get. I've also done again, like I was the tech editor of Popular Science, so I was on the Today Show as like the gadget guy, and I would just show up really excited and enthusiastic about science and technology. So I've definitely played things the exact opposite way for several years. And that's kind of how I viewed my transition into industry. I felt like it was just angling stories. You just had to be able to see things through the lens of the company and be able to kind of tell those key messaging points from their perspective, and hopefully kind of strategically. Again, I think at VentureBeat, I'm thinking about what's our positioning in the media ecosystem. How do we differentiate ourselves from The Verge and from TechCrunch and from all of these other tech publications? What makes us really unique? I think the answer to that would be that we get a little bit more technical, and we tend to focus on enterprise news stories or enterprise like B2B business stories versus a lot of the consumer tech that's out there. So I think story angles is definitely one of the key differences. And then, I'll also add that, I learned how big the disconnect is between newsrooms and some of these companies, when I was on the VC marketing side. So I think something I had to learn how to package and basically tell a lot of these founders was, just because you have a successful company doesn't mean that you're going to get written about. And so I think for business owners, and understandably so, that they're really frustrated when they have a really successful business, they're, millions of dollars in revenue, have a ton of momentum, and they just can't get Forbes or Fortune or VentureBeat or TechCrunch to bite on a story, and let alone the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or Tier One site. So there, I remember like speaking to so many different business leaders that were just frustrated by the fact that they couldn't get a story placed. It's like, well, we have a ton of success. Like, why aren't they writing this story? And I remember having to tell them, like, just because you have a successful business doesn't mean that it's newsworthy. It doesn't mean that it's a good news story. And so, the challenge for business leaders as storytellers, I think, is yes, obviously you want to have a successful business and that's the primary objective. But if your goal is to also build brand equity and do some of this marketing stuff on the content strategy side, you also have to have a really good freaking story. And so either you're solving a big problem or, that's been a pain point for millions of people, or you're radically, changing the way that people are thinking about quantum computing or robotics or, some frontier technology. And so I think, you have to find those big hooks, or maybe it's just part of a trend and you're really just trying to get your story placed in a trend piece. I think, you want to find those big news hooks, I guess, that kind of help the reader into the story. And so, those are typically the hardest to find. I think that that the exercise of like trying to find the right news hook for the right publication can be really frustrating and exhausting for a lot of business leaders, because they're thinking about other important details like revenue and, can we pay our employees on time and do they have insurance? And, so it's just piling on, 20 more things onto their to-do list to kind of think through the storytelling piece of this. But yeah, that was really the job on the industry side, was helping kind of be the bridge between these two worlds. How do I get, an academic who has, is doing frontier research or like cutting edge research? How do I get them, now that they've started a company, to tell a really interesting story? And how do I get them to relate to some of these people in the newsroom and hopefully a large readership? And it's going to be different for every company, obviously, and everyone's story is different. But finding those key details, I think, is something that I've always really prided myself on. And so whether it's like telling a story through the lens of popular science, where we're really excited and enthusiastic about science and technology, or through the lens of Gawker Media, where we're holding truth to power, and we need to, be the, we need to like check these companies that are really influential and be that the fourth estate or whatever. I think that I'm happy kind of existing between those two worlds, just based on like depending on what the situation calls for. And then I'll just kind of like just put a fine point on that. I think VentureBeat skews a little bit closer to the to the popular science, fascination with sort of what's going on in Silicon Valley, a little bit more than like running investigations and trying to do stuff like, I mean, I have a ton of respect for the people that are doing that stuff. Like The Information, I think, is doing a great job of just consistently breaking news and doing really deep investigative work. And Forbes recently has had a lot of really big stories on the AI beat. And I commend those writers. I have a ton of respect for them. For me, it's more just like, where do we, I try to think about it a little bit more strategically. Where do we fit into the space? And then I think on the industry side, that's what business leaders should be thinking about as well. Like, how can I strategically maneuver into the conversation, and what are some of those hooks that are going to draw readers in and draw, a larger user base into our story?
I love it. I have so many more questions here on my paper, but I know that every question I ask you is another 50 pitch emails that is going to come blow up your inbox, and you'll never get out there. So we're going to leave it there. This has been amazing. I love the answers. I love the thoughtfulness and the depth of how you're approaching all of these big issues. We need to have like 7 more of these podcasts. Like you said, each one of these questions is its own thing. So Michael Nuñez, thank you so much. Of course, everyone can find you VentureBeat.com. Super easy. You're on all the platforms, right? You're on LinkedIn, you're on X, you're everywhere. Everyone can just Google you, or eventually they will just ask their AI bot to find you and find your work for you. So thank you so much for the time today. This has been great.
Thank you. This has been awesome. Really appreciate it. And don't hesitate to reach out if you have a good pitch. All my inboxes are open and being flooded at all times. So yeah, look forward to hearing from some of the listeners, and thanks again.
Thank you to my guest, and thanks for listening. Subscribe to get the latest episodes each week, and we'll see you next time.